His wife vanished, leaving only a letter and a test. What he discovered next shattered his perfect world. The long road to nowhere. As the last glimmer of the Crestwood estate vanished in her rearview mirror, Clara Montgomery drove. The sleek, German-engineered sedan, a birthday gift from Julian, felt less like a luxury and more like a getaway car. Its engine a low, mournful hum against the asphalt. Each mile marker that flashed by on the interstate was a small victory, a tangible piece of distance she was putting between her past and whatever lay ahead. Her phone, tossed onto the passenger seat, buzzed incessantly, a frantic, vibrating insect demanding her attention. Julian, then her mother, then Julian again. Each buzz was a phantom touch, a pull back to the life she had just detonated. She ignored it, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her gaze fixed on the endless ribbon of road unwinding before her. She was a ghost in a machine, her designer clothes feeling like a costume for a role she no longer wanted to play. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the shifting colors of the sky as afternoon bled into a bruised twilight. The fuel gauge dipped precariously into the red, forcing a stop she had been dreading. She pulled off the highway and into a gas station that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Its fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the cracked concrete and rusted pumps. Her polished silver car looked like a visiting spaceship. As she stepped out, the cool night air a shock against her tear-warmed skin, she felt eyes on her. A man with a long, jagged scar that pulled one side of his mouth into a permanent sneer was leaning against a grimy wall, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He wasn't doing anything, just watching her with a flat, assessing gaze that made her skin crawl. In Bellevue, she was invisible in a crowd of similar wealth. Here she was a spectacle, a target. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, a protective gesture that was already becoming second nature. She fumbled with the gas cap, her hands shaking, suddenly aware of how alone she was. Utterly and completely alone. The man pushed off the wall and ambled towards the station's small convenience store, but the brief, unnerving encounter left a residue of fear. This was her new reality. There was no one to call, no one to protect her. Back on the road, the darkness pressed in, and with it came the memories. They were relentless, replaying in her mind like a film reel stuck on a loop of quiet humiliations. The gaslighting, so subtle she had barely recognized it as abuse for years, now seemed screamingly obvious. It was in the way Julian would dismiss her feelings as her being overly emotional or hormonal. It was in the way he would twist her words until she was the one apologizing for his bad behavior. A specific memory, sharp and cruel, surfaced with a vengeance. The annual hospital fundraiser gala. She'd been so proud of the work she'd done on the planning committee, and she had an idea for a new pediatric outreach program. She tried to explain it to Julian as they stood with a circle of his esteemed colleagues, all men in tailored tuxedos. He had listened with a patient, indulgent smile, the kind one gives a precocious child. When she finished, he'd reached out and patted her head, a gesture so condescending it stole the air from her lungs. "That's a cute idea, darling," he'd said, his voice smooth as velvet for his audience. "Really charming. Why don't you leave the big thoughts to us, though? Go get us another round of champagne, would you?" The laughter from the other surgeons had been polite, but it had felt like physical blows. She had smiled, of course. She had smiled, retrieved the champagne, and spent the rest of the night feeling like a decorative object, a hollow shell of a person. A painful memory, yes, but now it was also a shield. It was a reminder of why she was driving into the dead night with no destination. She couldn't drive forever. Exhaustion was setting in, a bone-deep weariness that made her eyelids feel like lead weights. She spotted a sign for a motel, the Starlight Inn, its single functioning letter, a buzzing S, flickering like a dying pulse. It was perfect. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial-strength bleach, a scent so far removed from the custom-blended potpourri of her old life that it was almost a comfort. The bedspread was a faded floral pattern, thin and scratchy against her skin. The anonymity of it all was a strange, liberating balm. Here she wasn't Mrs. Julian Croft, the surgeon's perfect wife. She was just a woman in room 12 with a lumpy pillow and a story she wasn't ready to tell. Before letting sleep claim her, She pulled out a small burner laptop she'd bought months ago. With trembling fingers, she logged into an account she had built in secret for the last 2 years. Her escape fund. It had started small, siphoning off bits from the generous household allowance Julian provided. Money he never noticed was gone. She'd sold off a few pieces of jewelry he'd given her, ones without sentimental value, and squirreled away the cash. She had told herself it was for a safety net, a just-in-case fund. She just never let herself define what "in case" meant. Until now. The number on the screen glowed in the dark room. It wasn't a fortune by Bellevue standards, but it was enough. Enough to disappear. Enough to start over. It was the most beautiful number she had ever seen, the price of her financial independence. Sleep didn't come easily. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, another ghost to haunt the lonely room. It was from a lunch they'd had last spring, at a restaurant where the water glasses cost more than this entire motel room. Clara had been trying, delicately, to hint at her unhappiness, at Julian's growing distance. Eleanor Montgomery, a woman who looked as if she were carved from ice, had simply waved a dismissive, diamond-clad hand. "Clara, darling, all men have their hobbies," she'd said, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "A smart woman, a strong woman, knows what to see and what to overlook. Your position, our family's position, is what matters. Don't be foolish." Foolish, the word rang in her ears. Was it foolish to want a husband who didn't make her feel small? Was it foolish to want a partner who didn't keep secrets? No. The foolish thing would have been to stay. That memory, meant to keep her in line, now served as the final nail in the coffin of her old life. It wasn't just Julian she was escaping. It was a whole system, a whole world built on a foundation of pretty, poisonous lies. The next morning, she woke to the gray light of dawn. She felt different, lighter. The decision had been made, the cord had been cut. Well, almost. She picked up her phone from the car. The screen was a constellation of missed calls and desperate texts. "Clara, this isn't funny. Come home. Your mother is beside herself. Call me now. Whatever this is, we can fix it. I love you." That last one almost made her laugh. It was a lie, as hollow as the rest of their life together. She walked out of the motel room, past the sleepy front desk, and around to the back, where a large, foul-smelling dumpster sat overflowing with trash. She held the phone in her hand for a long moment, the portal to her gilded cage. Then, with a deep breath that felt like her first real breath in a decade, she let it go. It landed with a soft, unsatisfying thud amongst the refuse. She didn't watch it fall. She didn't need to. She turned her back on it, on him, on everything, and got back in her car. The final leg of her escape journey felt different. The painful memories were still there, but they no longer had the power to cripple her. They were signposts now, reminders of the road she had left behind. She was driving north, following a half-remembered story her great-aunt used to tell about a small coastal town in Maine. Port Blossom. A place where people went to heal. A place where the ocean washed away secrets. It sounded like a fairy tale, but right now, a fairy tale was all she had. After what felt like a lifetime, she saw it. A weathered, hand-painted sign, its blue paint chipped and faded by the salty air. Welcome to Port Blossom. It was unassuming, real, and more beautiful than any landmark she had ever seen. The town itself was small, nestled around a harbor where fishing boats bobbed gently on the tide. It was a world away from the manicured lawns and cold architecture of Bellevue. It felt right. She pulled into the parking lot of a modest inn called the Harbor Light, its warm, yellow windows promising shelter. She killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening. For a long moment she just sat there, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a chaotic mix of terror and exhilarating hope. As she finally gathered the courage to move, her eyes caught a shape in the inn's main doorway. It was just a silhouette against the light inside. Impossible to make out any features. But the figure was perfectly still, standing there as if they had been waiting for her, watching her car pull in off the long, dark road. The silhouette in the doorway of the Harbor Light Inn resolved itself into the shape of a plump, smiling woman with a cloud of white hair and a cardigan draped over her shoulders. She pushed open the screen door, its creak a familiar sound of home that Clara hadn't heard in years. "Evening, dear. A bit late to be checking in. Must be tired from the drive." The woman's voice was warm, like honey and tea, and it instantly soothed a frayed nerve in Clara's chest. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a placid curiosity. Getting the room was a simple, blessedly mundane transaction. Clara paid in cash, using a name she'd practiced in her head for the last 100 miles. Clara Martin. A plain name, an invisible name. The room was small and clean, with a window that looked out over the dark, shifting water of the harbor. The rhythmic clanging of a buoy was the only sound. It was a world away from the oppressive, curated silence of the Crestwood estate. That night, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Clara slept without dreaming of gilded cages and mocking laughter. She woke to the sound of seagulls and the smell of salt in the air. For a fleeting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the reality of her new life washed over her, not with panic, but with a quiet, fragile sense of possibility. Dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, clothes that would have earned a pained look from her mother, she walked through the small town of Port Blossom. It was a place built of weathered wood and sturdy brick, designed to withstand storms. It was honest, real. Her exploration led her to a corner building with large, sun-filled windows and a faded blue sign that read The Salty Mug. The aroma of coffee and something sweet, like cinnamon, wafted out, pulling her in. The inside was a cozy clutter of mismatched tables and chairs, local art hanging on the walls, and the low hum of conversation. A handful of fishermen in heavy boots sat at the counter, their talk a comfortable rumble. Behind the counter, a woman with a cascade of silver hair braided down her back was wiping down an espresso machine. She looked up as Clara entered, and her eyes, a startlingly sharp, intelligent blue, seemed to take in everything in a single glance. The expensive but now rumpled sweater, the designer handbag held like a shield, the exhaustion clinging to Clara like a second skin. Clara approached the counter, her voice barely a whisper as she ordered a black coffee. The woman, whose name tag read Nora, poured the coffee into a thick ceramic mug, her movements efficient and sure. She pushed it across the counter, but didn't look away. She just studied Clara for a long, silent moment. "You're not a tourist, are you, honey?" Nora's voice was raspy, direct, and completely devoid of pretense. "You've got the look of someone running from a ghost." The blunt words struck Clara with the force of a physical blow, shattering the fragile composure she had so carefully assembled. Her throat tightened, and for a horrible second, she thought she was going to cry right there in the middle of this warm, welcoming coastal cafe. In Bellevue, no one would have ever dared to be so direct. They would have whispered behind her back, their speculations venomous but never spoken to her face. This raw honesty was both terrifying and, in a strange way, a relief. Seeing the panic in Clara's eyes, Nora's expression softened. "Hey now, I didn't mean to spook you. You just look like you could use a friend more than a cup of coffee, and a real breakfast." She gestured to an empty stool at the counter. "Sit." On the house. Hesitantly, Clara sat. Nora placed a plate with a massive golden-brown blueberry muffin in front of her. "Eat," she commanded gently, and for some reason, Clara did. As she ate, Nora talked about the weather, about a stubborn fishing boat engine, about the town's upcoming summer festival. She didn't ask Clara any questions, didn't pry into the shadows she had so clearly seen in her eyes. She just filled the space with her warm, grounding presence. It was an unexpected kindness, a lifeline tossed to a drowning woman. "You looking for work?" Nora asked casually, as if she were commenting on the tides. Clara blinked, surprised. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead." "Well, think about it," Nora said with a shrug. "My summer help went back to college, and my old bones ache more than they used to. Could use an extra pair of hands, just until you figure things out." She slid a simple one-page application across the counter. No pressure. An unlikely friendship began to form in that moment, a quiet understanding passing between two very different women. Later that day, Clara filled out the application. When it came to the line for her last name, she hesitated, then wrote Montgomery. As she handed it back, she saw it, a flicker of something in Nora's sharp blue eyes. A brief, almost imperceptible freezing of her features, a flash of recognition or something more complex that she couldn't decipher. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by Nora's usual warm, crinkly smile. "Montgomery, huh? Pretty name. Well, Clara Montgomery, the job is yours if you want it." Clara told herself she had imagined the reaction, that her mind was playing tricks on her after days of stress. It was easier than considering what it might mean. And so, Clara's new beginning started with the scent of coffee grounds and the hiss of a milk steamer. The work was simple, physical, and profoundly healing. Wiping down tables, taking orders, the clatter of plates, it was a rhythm that demanded she stay in the present moment, leaving little room for the ghosts of her past to crowd in. Her hands, once accustomed to holding champagne flutes and designer handbags, learned the weight of a coffee pot and the roughness of a cleaning rag. It was the first honest work she had done in her entire adult life, and with it came the first whispers of a recovery she hadn't even known was possible. The salty mug had its regulars, a cast of characters who painted a picture of the town's life. Among them was a man who, like Clara, seemed to be an island. He would come in every morning at precisely 7, take the same corner table that offered a clear view of the door and the street, and order a large black coffee. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet intensity that was both intimidating and intriguing. His name was Cole. He was a boatwright, Nora had told her, a veteran who had come to Port Blossom seeking quiet after his time in the army. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was a low, quiet rumble. Clara kept her distance, sensing he was a man who valued his solitude. Their interactions were limited to her setting down his coffee and him giving a brief, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. But she found herself watching him. She noticed how his eyes were always scanning, always aware of his surroundings. A habit, she supposed, from a life where awareness meant survival. One morning, after a night spent tossing and turning, haunted by nightmares of Julian's cold smile, Clara was a wreck. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold the coffee pot steady. As she approached a table, a splash of hot coffee sloshed over the side of the mug and onto her hand. She gasped, dropping the pot with a clatter. Humiliation and frustration washed over her. Before she could dissolve into tears, a large, calloused hand gently took the pot from her. It was Cole. He hadn't said a word, just moved from his corner table to help. He righted the pot and then, just as silently, went back to his seat. A few minutes later, as she was cleaning up her mess, he walked up to the counter and placed a steaming mug of chamomile tea in front of her. "Nora said you might need this," was all he said before retreating back to his corner. The gesture was so simple, so unexpected, that it brought a lump to her throat. He had seen her struggling and hadn't made a show of it. He had just helped. A few days later, she noticed him again. He wasn't reading his usual paperback. Instead, he was holding a small, heavy-looking object in his hands, turning it over and over. It was an old brass compass, beautifully made but clearly weathered by time and use. She watched as he polished it with a soft cloth from his pocket, his movements slow and reverent. As the light from the window caught it, she saw that the needle inside wasn't pointing north. It was spinning slowly, aimlessly, as if unmoored from the world's magnetic pull. A mysterious compass for a mysterious man. He wasn't using it for direction. He was looking at it like it held a piece of his soul. He must have felt her eyes on him, because he suddenly looked up, his gaze meeting hers across the room. His expression, which had been soft and distant, instantly became guarded, closed off. He quickly slipped the compass back into his pocket, as if she had caught him with a secret. The small, unspoken moments began to build a fragile bridge between them. A shared glance, a quiet nod, a silent understanding that they were two broken people trying to piece themselves back together on this new shore. One quiet afternoon, during the lull between the lunch rush and the evening crowd, the cafe was nearly empty. Sunlight streamed through the large front window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. As Clara wiped down a table, she felt it. A flutter. So faint she almost dismissed it as a muscle twitch. Then it came again, stronger this time. A tiny, definitive, internal tap, tap, tap. It was a message from a world away. She gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Her hand flew to her stomach, pressing against the spot where the tiny life inside her had just announced its presence. Her eyes widened, a storm of emotions swirling within her. Shock, terror, and a wave of fierce, overwhelming love that was so powerful it buckled her knees. The whole world, with all its pain and uncertainty, narrowed to that single, miraculous sensation. From his corner table, Cole looked up from his book. He must have seen the look on her face, the sudden stillness, the hand pressed to her belly. But his gaze didn't drop to her stomach. His eyes, a startling shade of green flecked with gold, locked directly onto hers. His usually guarded expression softened, replaced by an unnerving, knowing concern. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but in the silent cafe, it seemed to echo. The two simple words were loaded with more genuine care than she had heard in a decade, a question that seemed to see right through her walls, to the secret she was guarding with all her might. Cole's quiet question hung in the sun-drenched air of the cafe, a lifeline tossed into the churning sea of Clara's emotions. "You okay?" Two simple words, yet they held more genuine concern than a decade of Julian's hollow pleasantries. She looked from his impossibly perceptive green eyes back down to her hand, still pressed against her abdomen where the secret flutter had just announced itself. A bubble of hysterical laughter threatened to rise in her throat. Okay? Was she okay? She was a pregnant, unemployed runaway hiding in a small coastal town under a false name after discovering her husband was a serial philanderer. No, she was not okay, not even close. But she couldn't say that. She couldn't tell him or anyone. The secret was too new, too fragile, too hers. She forced a shaky smile, pulling her hand away from her stomach as if she'd been burned. "Fine," she lied, her voice thin, just a little dizzy for a second. He didn't look like he believed her, not for a second. A flicker of something, disappointment, understanding, crossed his face before the usual guarded mask slipped back into place. He gave a single, slow nod and returned to his book, but the moment had changed something. A silent acknowledgement had passed between them. He had seen a crack in her armor, and instead of exploiting it, he had offered a shield. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and strange. Life in Port Blossom was beautifully, blessedly mundane. Clara's existence became a cycle of waking to the cry of gulls, the scent of brewing coffee at the salty mug, the weight of a plate in her hands, and the ache in her feet at the end of the day. It was real. It was tangible. She learned the names of the regulars. Old Gus, a fisherman who smelled of brine and complained about the tourists. Mrs. Gable, the high school English teacher who always left a generous tip and a kind word. This small, tightly knit world began to feel less like a hiding place and more like the beginning of a home. She was building a new life, one simple, honest task at a time. It was a slow, quiet form of recovery, happening so gradually she'd barely noticed it. The peace, of course, was never meant to last. It was a Tuesday morning, the cafe bustling with its usual pre-work crowd, that the past finally came for her. It arrived not with a bang, but with the whisper-quiet purr of a six-figure engine. Through the large front window, Clara saw it first. A pristine black Mercedes, sleek and predatory, gliding down the main street of Port Blossom. It was so out of place against the backdrop of pickup trucks and weathered station wagons that it looked like a shark circling a goldfish pond. A collective hush fell over the cafe as the car pulled to a stop directly in front of the salty mug. Every head turned, every conversation died. The driver's door opened with a heavy, expensive thud, and a woman emerged. She was tall, rail-thin, and impeccably dressed in a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than all the furniture in the cafe combined. Her silver hair was coiffed into a perfect, unmoving helmet. Her face was a mask of cold, aristocratic beauty. It was the face that had haunted Clara's dreams, the face she feared even more than Julian's. It was her mother, Eleanor Montgomery. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The coffee pot she was holding suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Her legs threatened to give out. She was frozen behind the counter, a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming luxury vehicle. Eleanor glided into the cafe, her heels clicking a sharp, disapproving rhythm on the worn wooden floor. She didn't seem to notice the sudden, intense silence or the dozens of eyes fixed on her. She scanned the rustic room with an expression of profound disdain, her gaze sweeping past the local fishermen and the worn-out furniture until it landed with surgical precision on her daughter. "Clara," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a shard of ice. "What on earth is this?" "Performance." The word hung in the air, dripping with contempt. Performance. As if Clara's entire existence here was some childish play she was putting on for attention. "Mother," Clara managed to breathe, her voice a strangled whisper. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" Eleanor took a step closer, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on her alligator skin handbag. "I'm here to put an end to this absurdity. Do you have any idea? Any idea at all? The position you've put Julian in? The damage you have done to our family's reputation? The whispers at the hospital? The calls I have had to field from the board members' wives? Our name is being dragged through the mud because of this pathetic little tantrum." The injustice of it, the sheer breathtaking audacity of her words, sent a jolt of hot anger through Clara's veins, momentarily overriding her fear. His reputation. It was always about the men's reputations. Before Clara could find her voice, another one spoke. "This performance, as you call it, is her life," Nora said, stepping out from behind the espresso machine to stand beside Clara. She placed a firm, steadying hand on Clara's arm. "And she's not alone." Eleanor's cold eyes shifted to Nora, dismissing her with a single withering glance. "I don't believe I was speaking to you. You walked into my cafe and started threatening one of my people," Nora shot back, her voice low and flinty. "That makes it my business. Around here, we look out for our own. Clara is family." As if summoned by Nora's words, there was a quiet scrape of a chair from the corner of the room. Cole slowly rose to his full, imposing height. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He just stood there, his arms crossed over his broad chest, his gaze fixed on Eleanor. It was not a threatening look, but it was a deeply unsettling one. It was the look of a man who had seen true conflict and was utterly unimpressed by this display of social pressure. He was a silent, unmovable wall, and it was clear to everyone in the room whose side he was on. This unexpected show of support, this chosen family materializing around her, sent a surge of strength through Clara. She stood up straighter, lifting her chin. The terrified girl who had fled Bellevue was gone. In her place was a woman who had nothing left to lose. His reputation? Clara's voice was steady now, infused with a cold anger that mirrored her mother's. "Did you ever once stop to ask him about his actions? Did you ask him about Isabelle?" Eleanor's perfectly composed face tightened almost imperceptibly at the mention of the name. "A dalliance," she hissed. "A meaningless mistake." "A mistake?" Clara laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "He bought her a necklace, Mother. He took her to dinner at restaurants he never took me to. He lied to me for years, and that's not all." She took a deep, steadying breath, her hand moving to rest defiantly on her stomach. "I'm pregnant." The words dropped into the silent cafe like a bomb. Every eye widened. She could feel Cole's gaze on her, feel Nora's hand tighten on her arm. Eleanor's mask of icy composure finally cracked. Genuine shock, raw and unfiltered, flashed across her features. For a moment, she looked her age. Frail. But it only lasted a second. The mask was quickly reassembled, this time with a new layer of cold, hard pragmatism. "A pregnancy changes the calculus, of course," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But it does not excuse this. A marriage, Clara, is an institution. It is about legacy, about position. Sometimes, for the sake of the life we have built, a wife must learn to forgive. It is your duty." Duty. That was the word that broke the dam. All the years of being molded, of being told what to think, what to feel, what to wear. All the years of shrinking herself to fit into the perfect, pristine box they had built for her. It all came rushing out in a torrent of righteous fury. "The life you built for me, you mean?" Clara's voice rose, ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "A life where my only job was to look pretty at parties and ignore my husband's affairs? No, I am done with that life." She gestured around the cozy, sunlit cafe. These people, they have shown me more genuine kindness and support in 2 months than you have in my entire life. They don't care what my last name is or what board Julian sits on. They care about me." She took a step forward, closing the distance between herself and her mother. She was standing up for herself, truly, for the first time. "I am not your project anymore. I am not his accessory. I am building my own life here, for myself and for my child. A real life. So you can go back to Bellevue and tell Julian that." She looked her mother dead in the eye. "Go home, Mother." The finality in her tone was absolute. Eleanor stared at her daughter, for the first time seeing not a pliable doll but a stranger. A woman she didn't know and couldn't control. For a fleeting moment, Something that looked like regret, or perhaps fear, flickered in her eyes. But it was quickly extinguished, replaced by her familiar, icy rage. "You will regret this, Clara," she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "When you are all alone in this hovel, with nothing and no one, you will remember that you chose this." "No, Mother," Clara replied, her voice soft but firm. "I'll remember that I finally chose myself." Without another word, Eleanor turned on her heel and marched out of the cafe, her clicking heels the only sound in the stunned silence. The door of the black Mercedes slammed shut and the car pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust and disbelief in its wake. The cafe remained silent for a long beat. Then, old Gus cleared his throat. "Well," he grumbled, "reckon my coffee's gone cold." Just like that, the spell was broken. The low hum of conversation slowly resumed, a quiet act of communal support. Nora squeezed Clara's arm, her eyes shining with pride. "You did good, honey. You did real good." Later that evening, after the last customer had left and the cafe was quiet, Clara found a small, folded piece of paper at Cole's empty table. She unfolded it. Inside, written in a neat, precise hand, were just a few words. "Some scars are on the inside. You fought like a warrior today." Tears pricked at her eyes as she clutched the note to her chest. It was a validation, a recognition of a battle no one else could truly understand. As she stood there, shaking but feeling stronger than she ever had in her life, a cheap burner phone Nora had insisted she get for emergencies buzzed on the counter. She picked it up, a text message from an unknown number. Her blood ran cold as she read the words. "He knows where you are. He's coming." The flimsy paper of Cole's note felt like a talisman in Clara's trembling hand. The words, "You fought like a warrior today," a balm to a wound she hadn't known was so raw. A warrior. She'd never thought of herself that way. She'd always been the quiet one, the compliant one, the one who smoothed things over. But standing up to her mother, Eleanor, in the salty mug, that had felt different. It had felt like drawing a line in the sand with her own blood. But the fragile sense of victory was shattered as the burner phone Nora had pressed into her hand buzzed with a chilling finality. "He knows where you are. He's coming." The air rushed out of her lungs. Julian? Of course. Her mother wouldn't have been able to resist. The triumph of moments ago curdled into a cold metallic dread. She looked up, her eyes wide with a renewed panic, finding Nora's steady gaze. Wordlessly, she held out the phone. Nora read the message, her lips thinning into a grim line. "Well, hell," she muttered, her usual warmth replaced by a steely resolve. "Didn't take him long, did it?" The arrogance of that man. She looked at Clara, her eyes filled with a fierce protectiveness. "You're not facing him alone, you hear me? Not now, not ever." Cole, who had been quietly observing from his corner table, pushed himself to his feet. He didn't say anything, but his presence filled the small cafe, a silent promise of solidarity. The few remaining locals, old Gus grumbling into his coffee and Mrs. Gable marking papers, looked up, a sense of unease settling over the room. They had witnessed Eleanor's attack. They understood that whatever was coming next was likely to be worse. They didn't have to wait long. There was no warning, no polite knock. The bell above the door of the salty mug didn't just chime. It was thrown open with such force that it slammed against the wall, the sudden crash making everyone jump. And there stood Julian Croft. He wasn't alone. Flanking him was a man in a razor-sharp suit, his face impassive, a briefcase clutched in his hand like a weapon. Julian himself was a study in controlled fury. His usually handsome features were tight, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a cold hard light. He wasn't holding a bouquet of apology roses or a conciliatory gift. In his hand was a thick sheaf of official-looking documents, and he waved them like a declaration of war. This wasn't the act of a contrite husband. This was the calculated offensive of an enemy. "Clara," Julian's voice was low, devoid of the manufactured charm he usually employed. It was flat, menacing. "This charade is over." The man in the suit's forward, his voice as starched as his collar. "Mrs. Croft? I am Arthur Vance, legal counsel for Dr. Julian Croft. We are here to serve you with these papers." He extended the documents towards her. Clara felt Nora's hand on her arm, a silent message of support. Cole shifted his weight, a subtle movement that nonetheless drew Julian's venomous gaze. "What is this, Julian?" Clara's voice, to her own surprise, was steady. The trembling was internal now, a hummingbird trapped in her chest. "It's an emergency petition for conservatorship, Clara," Julian said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "It seems your recent flight from reality has given me grave concerns for your mental stability, and more importantly," his eyes flicked down to her subtly rounded stomach, "for the well-being of my unborn child." The words hit her like a physical blow. Conservatorship? Mental stability? He was trying to paint her as crazy, as unfit. The classic tactic of the abuser. "My child?" she repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You have some nerve, Julian." "Oh, I have more than nerve, Clara," he sneered. "I have a responsibility. You absconded from your home, you're living in this." He gestured around the cozy cafe with a look of utter disdain. "And you're clearly not capable of making rational decisions. This petition is for your own good, and for the baby's safety, of course." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. He, the adulterer, the liar, the gaslighter, was feigning concern for her safety, for their child's safety. "You wouldn't know the first thing about safety, Julian," Clara shot back, her anger beginning to burn through the shock. "Perhaps your condition is clouding your judgment," Julian continued, his voice taking on that infuriatingly condescending tone he used when he was about to deliver a particularly vicious blow. "You see, Clara, things are rather more complicated than you imagine." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes glittering with malice. "Isabelle is also expecting, my child, a child who, unlike this one, will be raised in a stable, appropriate environment by a mother who is demonstrably sane." The revelation hit the small cafe like a thunderclap. Isabelle pregnant too. His mistress. Another baby. It was a move designed to shatter her, to make her feel worthless, replaceable. And for a moment it almost worked. The air left her lungs, the fight draining out of her. He wanted to secure his legitimate heir, the one whose mother wasn't tainted by his lies, the one who wouldn't remind him of his deceptions. Old Gus, the fisherman, let out a low growl. "Now, see here, slicker." Nora's grip tightened on Clara's arm. "Julian Croft," she said, her voice ringing with cold fury, "you are not welcome in my establishment, and you will not harass this young woman. She is under my protection." Several of the other patrons, Mrs. Gable among them, murmured their assent, a quiet but firm wall of community strength forming around Clara. Julian scoffed. "Your protection? Don't be absurd. This is a family matter." "It stopped being a private family matter when you brought your lawyer and your threats into a public place," Nora retorted, her eyes blazing. Cole had been silent throughout the exchange, a thundercloud of controlled anger in his corner. Now he moved, not quickly, but with a deliberate, unstoppable force. He came to stand slightly in front of Clara, a human shield. His gaze, when it landed on Julian, was like chips of green ice. "You know, Croft." Cole's voice was a low, dangerous rumble, a sound that vibrated with barely suppressed violence. It was nothing like the quiet, reserved man Clara had come to know. "You remind me of a CO I had back in the service. Real ambitious fella. Always had his eye on the next promotion, the next commendation. Didn't care who he stepped on or who he sacrificed to get it." Cole's eyes narrowed. "Got a lot of good men killed chasing some damn piece of glory that wasn't his. Left a trail of broken lives behind him, all while smiling for the cameras." He took another step closer, and Julian instinctively flinched. "Yeah," Cole finished, his voice dropping even lower. "I know your kind." The insult, the implication that Julian was no better than a self-serving, morally bankrupt officer was clear. It hit Julian harder than any accusation of infidelity. His carefully constructed facade of superiority cracked, revealing the raw, ugly rage beneath. "How dare you?" Julian snarled, his face contorting. For a moment the sophisticated surgeon vanished, replaced by a common bully. He lunged, not at Cole but past him, reaching for Clara's arm. "You will listen to me. You're my wife." Cole moved with the speed and precision of a striking predator. He intercepted Julian's arm, his grip like a vice. "Don't touch her." Each word was a block of ice. The physical altercation, the sheer audacity of Julian's attack snapped something in Clara. The fear was still there, a frantic bird beating against her ribs, but it was now dwarfed by a white-hot, righteous anger. This was not just about her anymore. This was about her child. "Get away from me, Julian." Her voice exploded from her, ringing with an authority that surprised everyone, including herself. "You think you can just waltz in here and bully me? Threaten me with your lawyers and your disgusting lies?" She fumbled for the burner phone in her apron pocket, her fingers surprisingly steady. You talk about stability? About what's best for my child. Let's talk about that. Her eyes locked with his. Because while you were out playing the concerned husband, trying to paint me as crazy, I was getting my own legal advice. She saw a flicker of surprise, then dismissal in his eyes. He thought she was bluffing. He always underestimated her. I have a lawyer, Julian, she continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. A very good one from Boston who specializes in cases exactly like this. Cases involving manipulative, controlling husbands and their high-powered legal teams. She saw the first real seed of doubt plant itself in his eyes. And guess what else I have, Julian? She held up the burner phone, its screen glowing, the recording app clearly visible. I have every single word of this. Every threat you've made, every lie you've told about my mental state, your charming admission about Isabelle's convenient pregnancy. It's all right here. She gave him a cold, triumphant smile. My lawyer is going to have a field day with this. I wonder how the hospital board will feel about a conservatorship petition based on lies, especially when it's filed by a man who's about to be exposed as a serial adulterer and a perjurer. The color drained from Julian's face. The arrogant fury was replaced by a dawning, panicked realization. He looked at the phone, then at his lawyer, who suddenly looked very uncomfortable. The carefully constructed world of Dr. Julian Croft, the respected surgeon, the pillar of the community, was crumbling around him. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been utterly, irrevocably overturned. He had walked in expecting a quick, brutal victory over a broken, defenseless woman. He had found a warrior, armed and ready. You and Isabelle can have whatever life you manage to salvage from the wreckage you've made. Clara pressed on, her voice like steel. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, a gesture not of fear this time, but of fierce, maternal protection. But you will never control me, and you will never, ever control my daughter. She knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in her bones, that it was a girl. Julian was speechless, defeated. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. His lawyer cleared his throat, looking pointedly at the door. This isn't over, Clara, Julian finally stammered, but the words were hollow, his voice stripped of its power. It was the weak bluster of a beaten man. Oh, I think it is, Julian, Clara said softly, but with absolute finality. It's over. He stared at her for another long moment, at the woman she had become, the woman he had never truly seen. Then, without another word, he turned. He and his lawyer retreated, their departure far less dramatic than their entrance. The bell above the door chimed softly as they exited, a sound that felt, this time, like a final judgment. The moment they were gone, the adrenaline that had been coursing through Clara's veins vanished. Her legs, which had held her so steady, suddenly felt like water. They buckled beneath her. Cole was there in an instant, his strong arms catching her before she hit the floor, guiding her gently into a chair. She was shaking violently, great, shuddering sobs racking her body. Tears of relief, of exhaustion, of a pain so deep it had no words, streamed down her face. I did it, she whispered through her tears, her voice choked with disbelief. I really did it. Nora was there too, kneeling beside her, her face etched with concern and an overwhelming pride. She took Clara's trembling hand. You did, honey, she said, her own voice thick with emotion. You surely did, and you were magnificent. The weeks that followed the dramatic confrontation in the salty mug were a blur of legal correspondence and quiet rebuilding. Then, one crisp autumn morning, a thick envelope arrived from Clara's Boston lawyer. Her hands trembled as she opened it, bracing herself for another round of Julian's vindictive maneuvering. But the papers inside weren't a declaration of war. They were a white flag. A complete and utter surrender. Julian had agreed to everything. An expedited divorce, full custody of the baby to Clara with no visitation caveats, a more than generous child support settlement that would ensure her financial independence for years to come, and most surprisingly, a mutual gag order regarding the intimate details of their marriage. He wanted it all to go away. Quietly. Nora, it turned out, had a long memory, an even longer reach. With Clara's hesitant permission, a discreetly edited audio file of Julian's unhinged tirade in the cafe, along with his threats, and the shocking revelation about Isabelle's concurrent pregnancy had found its way to a prominent medical ethics blog and the private inboxes of several key members of the Bellevue General Hospital board. Dr. Julian Croft, the Golden Boy surgeon, was suddenly facing a firestorm of questions about his character and professional judgment. His carefully cultivated reputation was in tatters. Retreat was his only option. The peace that descended upon Clara was profound. The constant thrum of anxiety that had been her companion for years finally began to subside. As her belly grew, so did her quiet confidence. Nora, in an act of boundless generosity, had offered her the small, slightly ramshackle apartment above the salty mug. "It needs a woman's touch and a bit of paint," Nora had said with a wink, "but the rent's cheap and the commute's a dream." And so, Clara found herself preparing for motherhood in the most unexpected of ways. The tiny rooms, smelling faintly of salt air and old wood, became her sanctuary. Cole was a constant, steady presence during those months. He never intruded, never presumed, but he was always there, fixing a leaky faucet, expertly assembling a second-hand crib Nora had found at a yard sale, or simply sharing a quiet cup of coffee with Clara on the small, rickety balcony that overlooked the harbor. Their conversations were easy, punctuated by comfortable silences. The unspoken affection between them grew slowly, organically, like a sturdy vine taking root in fertile ground. They painted the nursery together, a soft, hopeful seafoam green. Laughter echoed in the small rooms as they accidentally splattered each other with paint. Moments of simple joy that felt like a lifetime away from the sterile grandeur of the Crestwood estate. This was real. This was hers. One evening, as the scent of Nora's chowder drifted up from the cafe below, Nora finally shared a piece of her own past. They were sitting in the darkened cafe, long after closing, nursing mugs of herbal tea. "You know Clara," Nora began, her voice soft. "Your mother, Eleanor. I knew her a long time ago." Clara looked up, surprised. "I was a housekeeper for the Montgomery family, just for a year or two, when you were just a little thing, barely walking." A shadow crossed Nora's face. "I left because, well, Eleanor was a hard woman, cold, especially to you. I saw things, the way she'd dismiss you, the expectations she had even then. It wasn't right." Nora sighed. "When you walked into my cafe that first day, and later when you said your name was Montgomery, I knew. And I knew you were running from something more than just a bad marriage." The revealing secret filled in so many gaps for Clara, explaining the fierce, almost maternal protectiveness Nora had shown her from the start. It was another thread in the tapestry of her new, chosen family. Another secret unspooled on a cool November night. Clara and Cole were sitting on her small balcony wrapped in old quilts, watching the moonlight dance on the dark water. He finally told her about the brass compass she'd seen him with so often. "It belonged to my best friend, Sam," he said, his voice quiet, roughened by memory. "We were on our last tour together. He didn't make it back." Cole paused, the silence heavy with unspoken grief. "His dying wish? He made me promise I'd find his kid's sister. She'd run away years before, got mixed up with a bad crowd. All he knew was she was probably in some small coastal town, trying to disappear." Cole looked out at the harbor. "I came to Port Blossom partly for that. Chasing his ghost, I guess. But I don't think she's here. Maybe she was never meant to be found by me." He turned to Clara, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "But I found other things, other people." He didn't need to say more. The compass was no longer a burden of an unfulfilled promise. It was a tribute to a lost friend, and perhaps a quiet acknowledgement of the healing love he was finding in this unexpected place. The nursery was almost finished. The little room glowed with a soft, peaceful light. Clara, now heavily pregnant, stood in the doorway, her hand resting on her rounded belly. Cole came to stand beside her, his arm brushing hers. He reached out, his calloused hand gently covering hers on her stomach. Just then, the baby gave a strong, decisive kick. A shared smile passed between them, intimate and full of unspoken promises. Life was still uncertain, the future unknown. But in that small apartment, above the gentle rhythm of the salty mug, surrounded by the quiet strength of Port Blossom and the steadfast presence of this kind, complicated man, Clara finally felt safe. She felt like she was home. The late autumn wind rattled the window panes, a reminder of the storms that could still gather. But for now, there was only a profound, healing calm. The late autumn wind, which had been a mere whisper against the window panes of the small apartment above the salty mug, escalated with terrifying speed into a howling gale. It was the kind of storm that reminded Port Blossom of its precarious perch on the edge of the vast, untamed Atlantic. And it was into the heart of this tempest that Clara's daughter decided to make her entrance. The first contraction hit her like a rogue wave, stealing her breath and doubling her over. Cole, who had been quietly reading in the worn armchair by the window, was by her side in an instant, his usual calm replaced by a focused urgency. The power flickered, sputtered, and died, plunging the small apartment into an eerie, storm-lashed darkness. Outside, rain hammered against the glass, and the wind shrieked like a banshee. "The clinic," Clara gasped, clutching Cole's arm. "We need to get to Dr. Sharma." The roads were already slick, visibility near zero. Cole's old truck, usually a comforting rumble, felt like a small, fragile lifeboat in a raging sea as he navigated the treacherous path to Port Blossom's small community clinic. Nora, her face a mask of worried determination, sat in the back, murmuring soothing words that were mostly lost to the roar of the storm. Every bump, every lurch of the truck sent a fresh wave of pain through Clara, but through it all, Cole's hand was a steady anchor on hers, his low voice a constant reassurance. The clinic was a small beacon of light in the darkness, its generator humming valiantly against the storm. Dr. Anya Sharma, her kind eyes radiating calm competence, was waiting. The hours that followed were a blur of pain, fear, and a primal, all-consuming effort. But with Cole holding one hand, Nora the other, Clara found a strength she didn't know she possessed. And then, as the storm outside began to finally exhaust its fury, a new sound filled the small room. A strong, indignant cry that cut through the receding thunder. Lily Grace arrived with the dawn, a tiny, perfect creature with a tuft of dark hair like Cole's and eyes that, even in their unfocused newborn gaze, held a spark of her mother's fierce determination. Dr. Sharma laid the squalling infant on Clara's chest, and in that moment, all the pain, all the fear, all the years of heartache simply dissolved. There was only this tiny, warm weight, this miracle. Cole leaned down, his face etched with an emotion so profound it left him speechless, and gently kissed the top of Lily's head, then Clara's forehead. Nora was openly weeping, her usual gruffness washed away by a tide of joy. 3 years later, the only storms that rattled the windows of the little apartment above the salty mug were the ones Lily brewed in her teacup during imaginative play. The sound that echoed there now, where once Clara had only heard the crashing waves of her own grief, was the bright, untamed laughter of a child. The salty mug itself had blossomed. Clara, now a full partner with Nora, had poured her quiet creativity into the place. In the sunny space next door, which had once been a dusty antique shop, now stood Lily's Corner, a cozy children's bookstore and reading nook, its shelves filled with colorful tales of adventure and wonder, a testament to her daughter's voracious appetite for stories. Clara had found her calling, not in managing charity galas, but in curating worlds for young minds, in fostering a love for the narratives that had, in many ways, saved her own. She and Cole were married. They had exchanged simple, hand-hammered silver bands on the beach at sunrise, exactly 1 year after Lily's birth, with Nora and a few close Port Blossom friends as their witnesses. There were no grand pronouncements, no society pages to document the event, just the quiet sincerity of two souls who had found their way back to life, together. Their new family was built not on obligation or expectation, but on a foundation of shared healing, mutual respect, and a love that had grown as steadily and surely as the tides. Lily at 3 was a whirlwind of bright energy and boundless curiosity. She had her mother's determined chin and Cole's thoughtful, sea-green eyes. She was a child of Port Blossom, unafraid of the crashing waves, her pockets perpetually filled with smooth stones and chipped pieces of sea glass. One sun-drenched afternoon, they were on their favorite stretch of beach. Lily, squealing with delight, was chasing sandpipers at the water's edge, her small footprints quickly erased by the incoming tide. Cole was skipping stones with her, his strong arms surprisingly gentle, his laughter mingling with hers. Clara sat on a worn driftwood log, watching them, a profound sense of peace settling over her like a warm blanket. This was it. This was the happy ending she hadn't dared to dream of. The the life she had built from the ashes of her past. She thought of Julian occasionally, but the memories no longer held the power to wound. He was a ghost from another life, a cautionary tale. His legal threats had evaporated after the disastrous confrontation in the cafe. His career, Nora had heard through the grapevine, had taken a significant hit. Isabelle, apparently, had also moved on. His world, built on lies and control, had imploded. Clara felt not triumph, but a distant, detached pity. He would never know a love like this, a peace this deep. Later that day, as Lily napped soundly in her arms in the rocking chair in the sunlit nursery, Clara looked around the small, perfect room. The seafoam green walls, the hand-painted mural of smiling whales and dancing starfish Cole had painstakingly created, the shelves overflowing with well-loved books. This was the home she had built. Not a mansion filled with expensive things, but a life filled with love, laughter, and the salty scent of the sea. Clara's journey from a gilded cage in Bellevue to the windswept shores of Port Blossom, from a life built on deceit to a home forged in truth and courage, raises a question many of us might face, in ways big or small. If the life you thought was perfect suddenly revealed itself to be a lie, would you have the courage to walk away from everything you knew, to step out into the terrifying unknown, to rewrite your story from scratch? Dear friend, life, as the wise ones often remind us, isn't about the cards we're dealt, but how we choose to play our hand. Clara's story isn't just a tale spun from imagination. It's a mirror reflecting the quiet courage so many of us carry within, often undiscovered until the storms hit. True strength doesn't always roar like a lion. Sometimes it's a whisper in the darkest night, a quiet voice that says, "This isn't right. I deserve more. I am more." Sometimes, strength is found in the terrifying, liberating act of walking away, even when the path ahead is shrouded in mist. Her journey is a powerful reminder that starting over, no matter how daunting it seems, is never a failure. It's an act of profound self-love. It's an investment in your future and the authentic life you were always meant to live. It's a declaration that you are worthy of happiness, of peace, of a love that nurtures your soul instead of diminishing it. So, if you find yourself standing at a crossroads, your heart aching with the familiar pain of a life that no longer fits, wondering whether to stay in the suffocating safety of the known or to leap into the terrifying freedom of the unknown, I hope you remember Clara. And I hope you remember this. You are not meant to shrink to fit into someone else's narrow definition of who you should be. You are not meant to silence your own voice to keep a fragile peace. You are meant to grow, to expand, to rise again and again toward the light that calls your name, toward the truth of who you are. If this story resonated with you, if it touched a chord deep inside, please don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who might need a beacon of courage today, a reminder that they too can find their Port Blossom. And subscribe so you don't miss the next story we have waiting for you. The next journey of the human heart we'll explore together. Thank you for being here. Your journey matters, and you are never truly alone. We'll see you in the next one.